Hi, welcome to our second video on Kenjougo. In this video, we're going to briefly review what Kenjougo is and when it's used, and then we're going to look at some more vocabulary words building off the last video that are used in Kenjougo. So to begin with, let's review the two conditions that are going to warrant the use of Kenjougo. First off, you're talking about yourself, and you're talking about what you are doing. Second, that whatever it is you're doing is going to be having an effect on somebody, or is going to be done for the benefit of someone, or something along those lines. So and that the people affected by that are people that you want to show respect to. So you can't just replace everything that you do with Kenjougo. It has to be having an effect on somebody else. That's critical, and we're going to see some of that in the example sentences for the vocabulary terms we're going to review. So our first word is ukagau, and this is a word that is really helpful to know because you hear it all the time on the news or in interviews, and especially if you ever plan on taking the JLPT, specifically N1 or N2, this word is going to pop up all the time, so it's really good to get a handle on this word early. It's going to have two meanings, two distinct meanings. The first is going to equal the general kiku or shitsumon suru, to ask or to ask a question. Let's look at an example of that. 中原社長に会社の改善のことを伺いました。Right. So we have ことを伺いました。So ことを聞きました。So we're going to ask about, right? So if we're asking about 会社の改善, the company's improvement, to 中原社長, this is going to mean I asked President Nakahara about the company's improvement. Not too difficult. The second meaning of ukagao that you need to know is going to be equivalent to standard Japanese, homo suru or tazuneru, meaning to visit. So let's look at an example sentence for that. 昨日、先生の家に伺ったら、奥さんはケーキを持ち帰らせてくださいました。Okay, this is a little bit of a long one, but let's break it up. Let's focus on this first one, this first part. 昨日先生の家に伺ったら, so you could also translate this as 家に訪ねたら、訪問したら. Yesterday, when I visited Sensei's house. Okay, so that's what ukagao is doing, visited. Yesterday, when I visited Sensei's house, his wife gave me some cake to take home. We don't really have to worry too much about this. Really get on ukagao and understand that it can both mean kiku and it can mean homon suru, and that those two meanings are distinct but common. The second verb we're going to look at is sashiageru, and this is going to correspond to ageru, which can mean to give, right? Or to do for somebody in the form te ageru. We're going to look at one of each of those. So first off, コップにお湯をついで差し上げました。コップにお湯をついで差し上げました。Right? So we're seeing that te, or in this case de, agemashita. So this is going to be did something for somebody. So コップにお湯をつぐ, imagine that つぐ, pour hot water in the cup. Put it all together. コップにお湯をついで差し上げました. I poured hot water in the cup for him, or for her, or for whoever, right? So that's the meaning do for somebody. The meaning of just give is exemplified by this sentence. 先生にペンを差し上げました. Very simple. I gave sensei a pen. But like its everyday form ageru, it's important to note that it can have the meaning of just to give, or in conjunction with another verb in its te form. I do something for somebody. It's very important. Alright, our next word is a word that you've probably already heard before. Itadaku. You probably know this from whenever we're about to eat in Japan, we say, itadakimasu, right? And you've probably, if you've ever heard a translation of that, you've probably heard it as, I humbly receive. And that's actually not wrong, because it corresponds to morau, to receive, and Kenjougo is humble language, so humbly receive is actually a pretty good translation of that. But again, like morau, it can have just the general meaning of to receive or to have something done for you. I had him do something for me, something like that. So let's look. 提出前、先生に読んでいただきました. So here we're seeing that de te form, itadakimashita, had somebody do something for me or somebody did something for me, right? So in this case, teishitsumae, before turning it in, sensei ni yonde itadakimashita. I had sensei read it for me. So imagine it's an essay or a project. Before I turned it in, I had sensei read it for me. Or sensei read it for me, depending on how you want to translate that. It's an important usage. Another similar usage. Sensei, 提出前にこの論文をちょっと読んでいただけませんか? Excuse me, sensei, before I turn this in, could you maybe read this essay for me? Or would you read this essay for me? This is a really common usage and probably where you're going to use itadaku the most in questions, because it's generally appropriate to use this in a lot of different situations, and so you're gonna find yourself in those situations, whether it be at work, at school, or even at the convenience store, and you want to say, could you heat this up for me, please? You could say, atatamete itadakemasen ka? Would you be able to heat this up for me, or won't I be able to have you heat this up for me? And if you use itadaku, it's a lot more respectful than just using morau. And so that's going to be very important to know. Another, zonjiru. Now don't confuse this with our son Keigo gozonji, which is a noun that means shiru. This zonjiru is kenjougo. Remember the differences in usage between those. And it also functions as a verb just like shiru. And it does mean shiru, right? So remember, gozonji, son keigo is a noun. Zonjiru, kenjougo is a verb. But they both mean shiru. So let's look. 部長がご存知かどうか私は存じていません. We're seeing both here, right? So let's break it down. First off, we have 部長がご存知. And now ご存知, we're seeing that noun. So we know that's son keigo, and it makes sense because we're talking about a third person, the 部長, right? And then so かどうか, if whether or not. So 部長がご存知かどうか, whether or not the 部長 knows, 私は存じていません. Because this is us, and it's kenjougo, we use zonjiru. So I don't know. So this could be translated as, I don't know whether or not the bucho, or the branch manager, or the section chief, knows. Bucho ga gozonji ka dou ka, watashi wa zonjite imasen. And now why it's going to be really important to know the difference between zonjiru and gozonji is because, as we know in Japanese, pronouns aren't always used. So, watashi wa might not be in a normal sentence. Bucho ga might not be in a normal sentence if both of those are already established by the context. So this sentence could easily be just, gozonji ka dou ka zonjite imasen. And it would have the same meaning. So I don't know whether or not the section chief knows or not. So that's why it's going to be really, really important to really know the difference between these two words specifically. Even though they both have the same shiru meaning, the usages are obviously distinct. So, in this video, we covered 4 kenjougo terms: ukagau, sashiageru, itadaku, and zonjiru, and we also reviewed when to use kenjougo. Remember, you're speaking about your own actions, and that action is going to have an effect on the second or third person you want to show respect to. That's it for our kenjougo videos. Hope to see you in the next ones. 今回もよろしくお願いいたします。